Hi everyone, and welcome to another tutorial here on unitycookie.com. This will be another in the NGUI mini-series. In this case, just taking a look at the basics of setting up your first NGUI GUI and putting a few things together from atlases to buttons, labels, some sliced sprites, which are really neat. Bit of a look at some settings on the buttons and Z-depth and such, all sorts of fun things. So let's get to work putting this together. First thing, hopefully you've already seen the font tutorial that we have here. If not, you might want to check that one out first, as well as, of course, the NGUI free install, just to make sure you have that all set. Those are right here on the Unity Cookie website. So if you have that, you'll now have, make sure you have your font set up and ready. I just have a GUI items folder in here, a folder called fonts, and I've made two different sized fonts, or two different sizes of the same font to use in this GUI. So make sure you have something like that. It doesn't have to be two, could be just one, could be 10 if you like. Anyway, so you have your font ready, the texture and the text. To create our first GUI here, all we have to do is go up to NGUI and down to create a new UI. And just a couple settings here. Layer, we do want to add a special layer for our NGUI, and the camera should just be on simple 2D. Let's add a layer by clicking on default, go to add layer, and just like anything else we'll add in, and I'll call this NGUI. Go back to here and set the layer to that new NGUI layer, and click on create your UI. Okay, so that creates a couple things. We can close out of this UI tool. Now in our hierarchy, instead of just the main camera, we have a UI root, a camera, an anchor, and a main panel. So each of these have some pretty specific roles. The UI root is just as it sounds. The root of your UI has some options in it we don't really need to worry about just yet. The camera is the camera for the UI. This will show the UI. It is different from the main camera, which, you know, of course, is showing items in your level. It's 3D and such. But the NGUI camera is just a just there to show the UI. That's all. Make it fit only right on the screen. The anchor below that. Anchors are a way of forcing or determining where GUI items are based on the screen. So if you look over here, we have the under the script, there's the side. We can change that from anything like center, bottom, bottom right, all the way up to bottom left and such. That'll choose where your GUI items are I guess, anchored to or originating from, depending on how you think of it. So not something to think on too much now, just to be aware of. Lastly, there is the panel, and the panel is where all your GUI will actually go into. And this is just a way of grouping all the GUI into one single easy-to-use object, and also makes the draw calls down to much, much less than if you weren't using these panels. So nothing too fancy there. Let's add some things to this GUI. First thing we'll need to do is to create an atlas and some button items. So I'm going to create a folder in the GUI items project area and call this, let's just say, button textures. And I have a couple textures actually from the Unity Cookie Tower Defense tutorial. Just steal those from myself and use them in this. So drag and drop them in. You can use whatever textures you want, or if you have downloaded the files, you can use these as well. So if I select all three of these, and I want to add them to an atlas for NGUI to use, and what an atlas is, it's just one big texture that contains all these smaller textures, and then NGUI can very cleverly use just the area of that large texture that each little individual button is in, and show just that. Sounds kind of complicated and weird, or at least to me, who had up to very recently actually never used atlases or much 2D at all. I've been mainly a 3D artist, but it's very clever, works great, and we'll see how it works as we put it together. So we're going to select all of those. Actually, first let's go ahead and set up our NGUI panel. We need our tools ready to go before we can do anything with these textures. So there's a couple nice little NGUI panels we can add. If you go up to NGUI, and let's create the or add the create a widget panel. So click on that and just drag and drop it. I like to drop mine down here under the inspector. And also a font maker. We'll drop that one in there also. And lastly, the atlas maker, which is the one we're going to use first here. So with the atlas maker and with this setup, don't forget, it's kind of handy. You can save the layout as something like NGUI setup, and then you can always swap back and forth between these if you want. Good to have. Okay, so we're ready to create our new atlas. Pretty straightforward to do this. Again, open up that button textures folder, select all three of those, and now you'll see in the Atlas Maker tab down here that it's showing that we're going to add these on. Let's drag this up, make it a bit larger just in case. Okay, so it shows each of the textures we're about to add, called sprites down here. Button, cannon, mine, and missile, which are each of these. And we just need to make a name for this. I'm going to call this Atlas. Actually, the name that was in there should be just fine. In-game. If you have another atlas, as we'll look at earlier, we can add them, as we'll look at later, you can add them on. In our case, we're creating a brand new one, so I just put in a name there, they're still selected, and just hit create. Very simple. So now, in the same folder that we had these selected in, we have all these items here, bunch of news. So we have the atlas texture itself here, which you can see is just one big texture with each of these dropped right in. We have the atlas, which is the item with the prefab image on the side here, or icon I mean, and we have the actual material. So 3 new items. I'm going to actually create a new folder for this as well. I'm going to call this atlas_in-game, and I just want to throw these 3 items into that to keep it more organized. So we have our atlas. Now we can start adding some items to the GUI. Let's select the panel under the GUI, and we're going to go over to the widget tool in the NGUI toolbox over here. Make sure Atlas in-game is selected here. If you need to, you can click on the Atlas button and select it. This will only show up if it was recently used. If you have a bunch of atlases going on and you can't find it, just make sure, or all you need to do is find the atlas itself in your project folder here and drag and drop it into the atlas. That won't always show up right there. For the font, if we had a font we would add it in. We don't need that just yet. We're just going to go ahead and create, we just say simple sprite based off one of these items here. So let's go to a sprite up here up top. We can choose a sprite. So again, NGUI is very clever and it'll tell us the exact name of each one. This is based off the name of the texture that went into it. So I want to do one maybe for the missile button, and click on Add to Panel. And this will automatically select whatever you have currently selected below the anchor, I guess, within NGUI. So it just drops it underneath that. So click Add to, and there we have it. Our GUI starting to come together just like that. You can see how this sprite is now underneath the panel. And the really nice thing about this is there's no code required to use this now. I can simply grab and move this around to wherever I want it in my UI. Super simple, super easy, very, very nice, and takes 0 time to set up. So that's the basics of setting up that. Let's go ahead and create our let's create the font next, and then we'll be able to create some actual buttons. So in the font tutorial, the other one here on Unity Cookie, we just showed the basics of setting up a font, and we had it create its own atlas. In this case, we want to create the font and also drop it into our this in-game atlas that we have, which means that we can save on draw calls because they'll all be packed into one single atlas, which just makes your game run a lot better, especially if you're worrying about making this game for mobile, like iPad and Android and such. So to do that, Again, very simple. We want to go over to the Font Maker tool. Bring that up a bit so we can see better, and just drop in the font data, just like from the other NGUI tutorial. So I'm going to start with the xscale 32, drag in the text file to the font data, and drag in the texture to the font texture. And now xscale, actually this is, rename this to xscale underscore 32, and we need to select the font that it's going to be added to. Since we're not, to overwrite, we're not overwriting a font, we're creating a new one, we'll leave that alone. However, we are adding it to an atlas. So where it says atlas, we can click and hit select on that. Once again, if this doesn't show up here, you can just drag and drop the atlas in-game into there. And with that selected, we can click create the font. Does some magic, and we now have a font in here. So now if we click on the atlas in-game texture, you can see that the font, which is all these blocky white chunks, has been dropped right into the atlas, so it's now part of it. Let's do the same thing for the size 42 font. So again, drag and drop in the Font Maker panel, we're going to drop in the texture to the texture, and the text asset to the font data. Change the font name here to font size 42. And let's make sure we're setting it, we are not overwriting anything. Clicking none on there, but it's going still into the atlas in-game. So click on create the font once more, and there we go. It's dropped the new 42 size font in there also. And I just noticed we accidentally named that new font, didn't give it a real name. So I'm just going to delete that and rename it real quick. Okay, that's fixed. Last thing we're going to do is just, again, keeping things organized, drag and drop each of these font prefabs now into the font folder. So we have them right in there. Okay, so that's set up. Now let's go ahead and do something with these. We'll create a quick label. So again, I'm going to click on the panel in the hierarchy and go to the widget tool, and we're going to create a label. So make sure the atlas is set to in-game. Choose a font. Here you can select either 32 or 42. I'll go with 32 for now, or whichever font sizes you have there, of course. For the template, I'm going to choose a label, and a label is simply just text, nothing else. When you create it, you have the option to set a color here, which of course also includes an alpha value for how see-through it is. We'll just leave it at a nice bright green, and click on Add to Panel. So there we have it, dropped it in. Now a label, let's turn off these stupid 3D gizmos. Okay, so the label is just like the sprite, and then I can of course move it around any way I want. Nothing too special there. You control it over here in the inspector. You can just type right here, set up what I want, my fancy text. Anything you type will come out exactly the same over here. In this case, the font I chose might have been a bad one because it does not have lowercase letters, but it will show uppercase or lowercase, however you want. One neat effect you can do to the font that I found out on the Eat Sheep game was that you can set the effect here to outline, and it gives it a nice little outline of whatever color you choose. So you can do some nice effects with that if you want. Or you can, make it shadowed, so it has a little drop shadow behind it, or none at all. So, nice handy little thing there. If you want this to be a large amount of text, and it's going to be sort of like a whole paragraph of it, for instance, my fancy text is a lot of text and goes on for a long time. So obviously that's getting a little bit annoying. It's not fitting on the page. You have the line width option here, and you can just drag this up or down, and it will automatically keep that font set right in there. And this line width is in pixels, so it's just pixels on the screen, exactly where it's going to start a new line, like so. You can also turn off multi-line, and it means it will only allow it to show however many pixels you have there. Multi-line will then, or turn it back on, and it will keep showing it and just move it down and so forth. Just in case it's useful to anyone, you can also turn on the password option, and it all in this case disappears maybe because there's too much in there, but generally with a short string it'll simply turn into the asterisks. That looks like a password properly even while they're typing. So that's it pretty much for the label. Nothing too fancy there. Again, you can go down and change the color tint again if you want. You can set the pivot just like any other NGUI item, which is exactly where, as you can see here, the anchor is for this particular item, which is handy if this is saying some stuff and you want it to come right out of the right, or sorry, the left, or the right, or be centered. Handy way to make that work just right. Last thing is the make pixel perfect, and you want to use this whenever possible before you publish the game or as you're making item and you're not going to move it again. If you get it just where you want it, make sure you click on make pixel perfect, and it will usually move the item just a tiny bit, but make it look a lot better in game. It just gets the pixels just right. Perfect, I guess. Okay, so that's it for those. We'll look back at some of those options a little more later, but let's go ahead and create an actual button. So I'm going to move this off to the side, and now again select the panel and go down to over in the widget tool area. I'm going to change the template to a button. And now once again we're making sure it's still on the same atlas. The font is whichever font you like. I'm going to choose the X-Scale 42 that I have, and the background. So I'm going to use, let's say, the button mine for the background. This will just be the image that's behind it, and click on Add to Panel. So now we get this rather odd looking thing that doesn't quite seem right. Let's go ahead and fix this up. So whenever you add a button first, the background item, it automatically gets a little bit stretched out, which we can fix quickly. Again, I'm selecting the button here in the hierarchy, clicking down, and we have the background and label. So the top level area, the top level of the button itself, has all the scripts to do button stuff, the collider to get the raycast when we click on it, and then inside of that is the background, the image, and the label for the text. So I'm going to make the label actually just say go. That sounds good. And make it something we can read by giving it a color. And once again, a nice little outline. Okay. And the background itself, you'll notice it's pretty stretched and funky looking. For some reason, when an item is inside a button like this, the make pixel perfect doesn't seem to work, so it's not going to make it the actual size, which would be the same as the missile one over here. So we can fix that. All you have to do is first just check what size this should be. I can click on the sprite and see it should be 80 pixels by 80 pixels, which you can see in the scale. So I'm going to set that directly, 80 by 80, and now it's proper size. Scale for anything with NGUI is just in pixels, that's all. So you're not setting it to be an 80 meter wide button or anything like that, like it would normally be for items. It's just pixels, so 80 by 80, and the Z is pretty much meaningless for a button, obviously, because it's just a flat plane like so. So there we have it, a little button like that. I'm going to move it around. One thing you'll notice, we have this green box around it, and that's the actual collider for the button. So if I've changed the background to be 80 pixels by 80 pixels, I need to also change the button itself. So just under the box collider, I'm going to set this to 80 by 80. This is one area where I'm not quite sure why it works this way. It's a little bit tedious, but not too big a deal. Gotta move my label up a bit so it fits inside there just right. And there's our button. So if I hit play, I can now hover over that, click it, do all sorts of fun things. So we have a real button, some text, a sprite over here. All very simple to make, especially once you do this once or twice. As I'm explaining through this, it seems to take forever to create a button, but it's literally just 1 or 2 clicks. Set it up as you want it, and then it's done. Okay, so we've got a button. Now, the last major thing I want to do here is add in a sliced sprite. And these are a really cool way to make backgrounds for buttons or for text paragraphs and such, or lots and lots of things you can do with sliced sprites. Very simple to use. So under the GUI items, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this Sliced Sprites. And I'll drag and drop in one that I have also from the tower defense tutorial. So a sliced sprite is simply a box that is going to slice in a couple directions, basically just vertical and horizontal, and then it's going to spread it to whatever size you want it to be without stretching out and making the pixels ugly. It's a very cool effect, and you can do a lot with it. So to create one, all you need is any size box whatsoever. In my case, I have this one here. Let me make a closer view of it. That's all it is. Simply a quick box I made with a bit of, there's actually some alpha transparency on the edges. You can't actually see them, so it's rounded off. Keep them small. You know, mine is only 64 by 64 pixels. That's about all you need, depending on the size of your game, of course, or the screen you'll be showing it on. Just a little bit of experimentation. We'll get that right for you. So once I have that, now we're going to add this to the atlas. So pretty simple to do. Simply go to your atlas maker. Make sure that the correct atlas is selected. So atlas in-game is set there. And you'll see now that we have the sliced sprite underscore glowbox, or whichever yours is, selected. Underneath the sprites shown in here, we have its name and the add is next to it. So NGUI already knows that we probably want to add this texture, and we'll do that. Just simply, make sure that's still selected, click on add, and it drops it right in there. This also works if you happen to change the slice sprite at all. You'll just want to select it, or any one of these textures, I mean, and click on add update all, and it'll simply update whichever ones you have selected. So handy for that. And now we can create that. So again, select your panel back in the hierarchy, go back to the widget tool, and choose the template sliced sprite. And then we'll choose the sprite that we want. So this is the sliced sprite glowbox, which has already seems to have figured out that's the one we want. I'm not sure how. Maybe it knows because I typed that in there. Either way, that's handy. But just make sure you have that selected, the slice sprite option. And again, that's pulling that directly from the name of the texture we just dropped in there. And it's pulling from the in-game atlas. So once that's set up, just click on add to panel, and that drops right in. So what can we do with the slice sprite? Very simple. Select it in your hierarchy, and then go to the scale option and scale it just like such. And the first thing you'll notice right now is it's actually looking terrible. So we need to do one more thing to set this up. Go back to your atlas, and let's do some settings on it. So again, select the prefab icon item, the atlas in-game prefab. And if you scroll down in the inspector, here, if I could make this get out of the way a little bit. There we go. With the atlas selected, we have a whole ton of options here. Don't worry about too much of it. The only thing we want to do is go down to the sprite area here and choose the sliced sprite glowbox, or whatever yours happens to be named. Just grab that one, and we'll see it shows up right here. It shows it as it is there. And we need to set the border options on this. So pretty simple, left, right, top, bottom. We're going to set this to a little less than half for each of these, so it kind of chops the edges up. If we put this to, let's say, maybe 30, 30, 30, and 30, you see it gets these lines that move through here. and set where exactly the border is. And you can even see this in real time now, updating over here. This is now a proper, awesome looking slice sprite. You can see as I move this how it affects it. So you could set this to however you might want exactly. 30 seems to work pretty well, so we'll leave it at that. And there we have it. That's our slice sprite. And again, you can simply scale this up and down, and it will look great always. It's click on the make pixel perfect to get it just right, and very handy for putting behind text or boxes or buttons. Makes a great item for that. Of course, we're having a problem here, and this will be the next item in this tutorial, in that this is showing up on top of everything, and we probably want it to actually be behind these items. So NGUI has a very simple way to take care of this, and that is the depth right here. So anytime you select any NGUI item, you'll notice right at the very top, right about there, beneath the atlas is the depth, and this is exactly like it sounds. It just sets it higher numbers on top of other items. So if I bring it back, you can see it coming out behind these items, and there, now it's behind each of them. It's okay to go negative, doesn't make any difference. I'm going to bring this all the way back to, say, -1, just to make sure it's behind everything. And I could do the same with either of these. Say for some reason I wanted this text to be behind the other one, I can bring that back or forward. One thing, just be careful that you don't accidentally end up with 2 on the exact same depth layer, so 3, and then my text is also on 3, because it might look, in this case, it's showing that it's wrong in the editor, but it might look just right, but then it'll actually flip-flop in game or kind of spaz out. Won't be good. So just make sure you have them set on different layers if they're going to be, or depth layers here, if they're going to be overlapping one another. Okay, so let's make this work. One thing with these slice sprites, just like everything else, again, you can set the pivot, and we probably want this to be, say, bottom left. And now I can put this right about there, and I can scale it up and down really easily, and we have a bit of a GUI coming together. So very, very simple, easy to put together. Let's look at some of the more in-depth settings on each of these just before we finish up this tutorial, and then look at the draw calls this is creating and such. So looking at the sliced sprite here, we have a couple options under here. Really just the usual correction, the pixel perfect making, the pivot setting, and then the color tint, which is just like the text, is going to change the color of this, which is very handy. And one thing, you might have been questioning why all of my buttons are white and black, and it's for this exact reason. I can now use this color tint to make this button any color whatsoever. So if I want it to be red, or yellow, or green, or blue, I can do all sorts of fun things. And the really great part is you can even animate this from NGUI, something we'll look into in another tutorial. So you could, have your button glowing or pulsing and do all sorts of fun things. So let's say I want a bright, sort of bluish green slice sprite, and then I can set the color to be a little more see-through using the alpha down here. And I can do the same thing with the button as well. Maybe I want a orange button. Who knows? So just like that, that color tint area is a nice option to have. Okay, so we have that working. With the buttons, we have a little more options than just a slice sprite. Mainly, whenever you create a button, you'll have the box collider. You want to make sure that's on. Trigger, just basically leave it as is. Only thing you'd ever really change is the size, which is just going to set the area that the user can click on. In some cases, maybe you'd want sort of an invisible button area, so you could set the size of the actual box collider larger, or even, in the opposite case, it could be smaller if you wanted it only to be a portion of the visible area. I'll just keep it on 80 and 80 for now to fit exactly the button size. When you create the buttons, they also automatically come with several scripts. And these just change how it works in various ways, just visuals. We won't get into making it do anything just yet. So taking a look here, we have the UI button script, and this will make it just change color when you're hovering or when pressed. So this can set a color, so let's say on press it could turn bright red, and on hover we want it to be sort of a purplish pink. Now if I hit play, as I hover we get that pink, when I press it turns red. Pretty simple. There's also a button scale script on here automatically, and all this does is on hover it scales up the X, Y, and Z to 1.1. Pressed it makes it a little bit less, and the duration, the time it takes is 0.2. There's also the duration up here. So this is just as it sounds, scaling it up and down when you hover or press on it. You can change that to anything you want. Say for some reason we wanted the X scale to go up to 2 when we hover. And we'll make this maybe a little bit faster for each of these. So now you can see it goes much quicker. It does have a pretty crazy looking button going on here now. Just showing how it works. This has a button offset script which will make it move. So in this case it's going to move 2 pixels in the X, -2 in the Y, and do it over 0.2 seconds whenever it's pressed. It does nothing when it's hover here. Make this also 0.05. I found this a good value for buttons generally. And oops, I'm going to drop this back to something that makes a little more sense. Okay. The last thing is the UI button sound, and this does exactly what it sounds. It's just going to play a sound when you click on it. So you just drag and drop in your audio clip there, and then you have the trigger itself. So this just, depending on which one you choose, it could be on mouse over, it'll make a sound, on mouse out, on press, on release, or on click. Any one of those you can set right up. The volume and the pitch, very simple. Again, these are things you can also control via scripting and such very easily. So you could, change the sound of a button depending on certain items. But there it is, very, very simple, setting up your button. So take a look at that one more time. So simple, neat little button just like that. So the last thing, we'll take a look at the draw calls this is generating. So just a little bit technical as the last thing here. Normally you'd have, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 draw calls all generated from this, but because NGUI is awesome, and we're using one single panel and one single atlas, all of this generates, and it's showing 8 draw calls right now, but I guarantee you something is wrong there. Generally, it'll generate one single draw call. Oh, I know why, because we have the free edition, so it has these extra items showing up on the left and the right, which are adding extras to it for some reason. In general, as long as you have all your items within one panel and one atlas, you'll end up with only one single draw call, even if you have a very complex UI, which will make a big deal for any mobile games, again, like iOS, Android, etc. Draw calls are your #1 enemy, so NGUI is great about crunching those all down into as few as possible. And that's it for this tutorial. Thanks again for watching. I hope it gives you a better idea of how to use the basics of NGUI, and we'll get into more advanced in the future. Thanks much.